Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dojo Live this Friday, January 27th, where we're going to be having the fourth part of our four-part Metaverse series. My name is Kim Lantis, and it's my pleasure to be moderating today. Joining me are Fermin Chavez, UX researcher at Encora, Dianela Gamboa, UX designer at Encora, and for the first time here in this series, Flavia Negrao, who is an experienced design studio manager, also with Encora. How are you all doing today?
Hello. Doing
Very
good?
well, thank you.
Yep.
Perfect. Perfect. So, for those of you who might not have had a chance to watch the first three shows, I would encourage you to stick around first, but then you can always go back at our site, dojo.live, and watch the first episode, which is all about metaverse basics, virtual, augmented, and mixed reality. We followed that up with what finances are like, both inside and outside of the metaverse. And last week, we talked about beyond the imagination, and this is representations of the metaverse in pop culture and what that kind of looks like and has been aligning with in the real world as well. Today, we're going to be talking all about metaverse and social impact. But before we do that, I really would like to get a chance to know you a bit better, Flavia. We've had Fermin and Dianela with us all throughout the month of January. Right. but you, what's your story, Flavia? Your passion and what sort of led up to where you are today?
Okay. So let's see my background. So I graduated in systems analysis, and then I kind of moved to design over 20 years ago and been working with design ever since. I've been in Encora for the past 10 years. So this year I'll be 10 years at Encora, Brazil. And 2 years ago, we created the Experience Design Studio here, which I'm leading. And I'm leading a team of about 16 people now. So pretty much that's my story. I like to solve problems.
16, like 60 or
no,
16,
16,
1 6? 1
no,
6.
16.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
1
right.
6. It's good enough. 1 6. Yeah. But I like solve problems and helping making people's lives easier through design. So I think.
All right. I love it. Yeah. That seems to be the common thread of those who have been on this series with us. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. So as we dive into metaverse and social impact, we really want to look at how the metaverse is being used to better the lives of people, right? Via healthcare, education, and other things. Up until now, a lot of what we've looked at has been relatively entertainment based. And so I think this is a good way to dive into the why does it really, really matter? And so let's just start out with this education piece, right? We know that education is one of the, if not the, probably biggest force behind social change. And so how might the XR real technologies, metaverse be contributing to education?
I'd like to start. Okay, I will go. So I think there's a lot of what the XR technologies are doing right now on the education side. And I can think of a lot of examples, but one of them, and I think my favorite, is that, um, you know, there are several schools that are far away from the ocean, from the you know, the sea. So they could never imagine being a biologist. Like, I want to, learn about sea creatures and something like that. They'll need to go to the internet and maybe they can watch videos, but that's it. They can never experience that really closely, so they can never change their mind saying, hey, I want to be a biologist. Because I think a phrase that this Marian Wright said is, you can't be what you can't see. So it was really cute for me to think about these experiences that in the VR technologies, they created this application for mobiles, and they could experience with the cardboard from Google. And it was a program that they go to schools and teach them about the ocean and the creatures. And actually, they had like these little notes where they could learn about the turtles and learn about the, I don't know, whales, and they could be researchers. And that's something really cute and beautiful that I think could get these experiences to the places that they could not. So again, you can think in a bigger examples okay, how do you learn about space? So that ocean, maybe it's like you can go there sometimes, maybe, but what about the space? And there's these little models with all the rockets and everything, and you could tear those apart and see all the pieces and just manage them with your hands or in virtual reality or augmented reality. So all of these technologies are I don't know, maybe becoming more normal in this education space. And I think those two examples are really really cool for me. Like, what can we experience but to learn about, not just to have fun.
Hmm. What you mentioned, accessibility in terms of a mobile device, a headset, even if it's a very, accessible, low, I don't want to say low quality, but simple, right? Cardboard version.
Cardboard.
But this thing makes me think of this as like a simulator, right? And these simulators, I guess, have been around for quite some time. What makes the traditional simulator that I think we've even seen on television and represented in pop culture since maybe the 80s, before then? What's different now? How does this change from what we've been using in terms of a simulator in the past?
I
Fermin?
think there's um, I think they used to be like we've done most of the technologies that become consumer products have been around for a while, but the shift that happens for them to be able to go into the mass market is how accessible they become. Like we've had simulators, but they were like these expensive pieces of equipment because the technology needed to run them was bulky, was needed to be there, and that's changing. And I think don't quote me on this, but like some training is being done on simulators. Like we have the flight simulators that as part of a pilot's training, and note that can also move into the metaverse. But there's also a lot of things that didn't have simulators before. Like the only possible experience was to do it on site, but that also can move into the metaverse or the XR technologies. And I think that it's interesting that I know Dianela took us to space and I'm bringing us back to Earth. But I had a friend that was finishing her degree as pandemic started. They moved into remote learning, and one of her classes was a biology lab. And it's very complicated to do that remotely. They used to have like a graphical interface with a microscope, and you would move your mouse and put the slides into the microscope and adjust it. And I would argue that you're not really learning a lot of it because most of what we learn needs to be embodied learning. You need to experience it with your whole body, your whole senses. And the interesting thing about the XR technologies is that they can do that. So it's a very interesting thing because we're shifting from like an external based simulation to a software or mostly uh, virtual one. And that allows for the technology to be lighter, more accessible, and the training to be even more embodied. So it's a good
Yeah.
balance, I would say.
And I think going back to the education piece and the accessibility of it, Dianela, I'm unsure, but it sounded to me like this simulation of the ocean and biology that you brought up was probably in maybe a primary school, an elementary school, like to children, right? And I think what's really cool about this is it can inspire the imagination early on and even give a sense of what it might be like to live or work in a field, right? Without having to have this huge disruption. Like, let's say, gosh, I want to be a marine biologist. I'm from the Midwest, completely landlocked, and I move far away and I invest thousands of dollars and whatever into my education to study in Washington State or California or go to Florida or Hawaii. And then, surprise, and a year in, I realized I don't like this, right? Something that we could maybe discover a lot sooner, or the opposite of that, thinking, having the hands-on experience of something that we didn't think we'd enjoy at all or interest us at all, and then be able to say, hey, maybe this is worth exploring. Because eventually you're going to have to get to the ocean, right? You can't be a marine biologist via a telephone and a headset forever. But I think it
Exactly.
saves a lot of steps. Flavia, what's your take?
Yeah, so what I was thinking about when they were saying that is we can also bring that into the enterprise world. Like, so we have the simulators for a long time, But now we can apply that to other environments. So we can apply that to logistics. For example, we can train people to, I don't know, in the supermarkets to put the products in the correct shelves, right? So you can do that remotely. You don't have to be in the place. And as Fermin was saying, like before the simulators, you had to go to the simulator. So you had a place that you had to go to. Now you can bring the simulator to you. Another thing that I think is interesting, we can bring that to the work environment. So doing onboarding from people. So since we are working remote, I don't know, we can have, let's say we have our Encora office, our main office, and you do onboarding, and we can walk around the company and do the onboarding within the company, So then we can walk around and get to know the office and bring in the training inside that. So I think that's something that I would see as you said, like we can be anywhere. So we can bring that to the world, to the people in a better sense now, I think.
So some of the benefits, I guess, that I'm hearing of utilizing the metaverse within education has to do with accessibility, feasibility. It's more cost effective. It can perhaps be more efficient in terms of senses of discovery, right? Cutting out travel time and different things up to a certain point. Are there any other benefits that we haven't really touched on yet that come to mind?
I think I did touch on it somehow, but yeah, the embodiment aspect of it, like there is a psychological, neurological basis for this, because as you were saying, like we have this perception that remote learning is not as good as in-person learning, and that may not stay the truth forever, because the reason we think that is because in fact we cannot concentrate, we don't engage with remote learning the same way we do with in-person learning, and that's been our crux for a while now. But the thing is that the reasons for it have to do with psychological, neurological effects. The fact that there is a bulky interface between you, the fact that your body, your mind drifts away, sorry, because your perception is not really there. And what these technologies change is that your perception is there, your learning is being embodied by you. So all of that you internalize very, very effectively. I'm not sure if we can get it to a lifelike in-person state, but it's a possibility. It's a tangible possibility for the first time ever. And that may be the thing that we need to start reevaluating how we think about remote learning, remote education, because for the first time, it can be just as effective at what it tries to teach you. Like you may learn just in the same quality and internalize your learnings in the same way as you would with quality in-person learning.
That's a really good point. And I think part of this, aside from education, or maybe there's even this overlap, right? Use of education, but also in healthcare is my understanding. That's another space where the metaverse has really kind of overlapped and we're able to experience in the real world today. It's not just in the future. So let's talk about that. What's happening in metaverse and health?
I think, well, I was already talking about psychological, neurological basis for the metaverse. And I think it's a natural leap to think about mental health first, because since what makes these technologies work is the effects they are based on, most of them have to do with our processing, our psychology. And mental health is a thing that is coming up a lot. And I don't want to go into details, but I found this very interesting article about counseling. I guess it's not yet therapy, it's just counseling. And they tested having you give counsel to yourself. Like you walked into a session, you explained your problem, what you needed counseling for as your own avatar, and then you switched to a different avatar. This was a Sigmund Freud avatar to give advice to yourself. And what they found is that that was useful. People really took that from a different perspective because they were embodying a different body. They were seeing their situation from afar, like they were removed from
Mhm.
themselves, and they took away a positive experience. They did report that they did learn, they did better their moods. So there's
Huh.
a lot of opportunities for therapy and for new forms of therapy there. There's
So it's this
another,
way of sort of thinking out loud without having to feel crazy about it.
yeah, we all do it, but we finally get to,
I am Freud. I'm not crazy. I think that's good.
yeah, and just another shout out. There was also a study that proved that group experiences in VR can have the same effects as psychedelic drugs. Like users report like the same sense of like heightened experience being outside your own body, but sharing a common sense of presence with others. Like these kinds of intersubjective experiences, they can be replicated with VR technologies, and that play between presence and embodiment and
Mhm.
all of the effects in psychology that has is new ground for therapy.
In terms of group therapy, I think, and how we're able to cross distances, space, like, right now, your Facebook and TikToks and whatever, a lot of the threads the algorithm has been feeding me, because apparently I like it, is people who are have some very rare like genetic mutation or a health condition where they're like 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 1,000 people in the entire world, right, who experience this condition. Just yesterday is a girl who was allergic to water, including her own saliva and her own tears. Like, it's crazy. And I think, so what I'm thinking of in terms of group sessions and things, like, how cool would it be to be able to talk with and live with and interact with, touch in a certain way, individuals like you that you would never probably be able to actually interact with in the real world, and the benefits of what that would just be to have this relatability was fantastic. Any takes that you might have, Flavia, Dianela, in terms of health?
Yeah, what I was thinking about, like taking that lead from Fermin, is like in the virtual environment, and he was saying like embodiment. And I think once we are, the key thing for metaverse, I think, is immersiveness. So once we are immersed in that, we'll feel as we are part of it, right? And so from the learning side, it's kind of today, like we are distracted by things that are happening around us. So once we are immersed, so we are really connected with that virtual environment. And it can be also playing a larger role for therapy for different conditions, let's say psychological, as like phobias. And that could be a way for you to treat your phobia. So you'll be exposed to fear, for example, but in an environment that is safe, because it's a virtual environment. So I don't know, I'm afraid of height. Let's say I'm going to go to a cliff or something and look, maybe, but I'm not in a building that is, I don't know, a sky rise, or that I'm going to really fall, and I can really, I don't know, see that, but it's going to be, so I will feel the fear, but I won't really jump, and I'm not going to die from there, right? Because it's an environment that it's a virtual environment. So this could be some treatments that could be done for treating people, and other therapies like anxiety or depression. So this could be also treated in these environments that could be safely tailored for these treatments. So I see this on these health environments as something that could be helpful for in the metaverse.
Yeah, and I think in these two themes, coincidentally, the very next show that we're gonna have here, and this is serendipity, guys. The stars aligned, the universe, they heard our call. But next Thursday, excuse me, talking about saliva here, I'm choking on my own. On next Thursday, the 2nd, we're actually going to be talking with Fundamental VR, and this is Richard Vincent, the CEO, is going to join us, and it's all about the future of medical training, right? Accelerating human competency via precision VR simulation. So I think it's an interesting take of the two topics we're talking about here, right? This overlap of education with healthcare. So for anyone who's enjoying today's talk, you're definitely going to want to check out the next talk as well, which is a chance for us to sort of see this in action. We've also kind of touched, I think, in my terms of, this group chat, this psychotherapy simulations with rare illnesses and different things. So the sense of inclusivity, how about the metaverse and just people? Is this also something that's inclusive, accessibility? What's this going to look like, or what is this looking like?
I think Dianela has very interesting takes here.
Yeah, I
Please.
do. I do. So we were talking about this the other day, and I was like, okay, but what is accessibility and inclusivity in the metaverse? And we were talking about what will be capable of, like, changing this. Like, okay, maybe people who can walk will be joining in with their VR sets, but what about the other people that cannot see? Like, we were thinking, like, okay, I use glasses. Okay, I use glasses. So in the past, maybe that was a disability. So if you couldn't look well, if you look wrong, if you were I don't know, like, colorblind, it was a disability until the lens lenses glasses were invented. So that's like uh evolution on disabilities. But also we could um change the idea of, what if I don't have ears? How will I use my glasses? Like, I will just hanging in my head. Like, imagine that I don't have this, then how? So that's a lot of thinking on this accessibility part. Like, okay, this will be useful for a certain type of people, those who has ears. But what happens if I don't have a nose? What is going to, like, do that? So let's translate this to the metaverse. What happens if I can see? How will I be joining these metaverses? What happens if I don't listen? So there's this term in the metaverse that's called the degrees of freedom. So that means that the more senses that you have inside the metaverse is the more immersed that you will be, right? Because if you have your five senses inside it, it's like you're going to stop having this sense of reality. It's just spirituality. So what happens if I have just four senses? If I have three? Like, how are we going to deal with these cases? It is not an answer, of course. It's a question, and it's maybe something that we should think about when we think about the metaverse and accessibility. Accessibility is just not colorblind. Accessibility is more than that. So that's something that I was thinking on. That was her main idea too. But I think that's very interesting to start building on it. Like, okay, are we going to move to this way? So what happens also if we start having new disabilities in there, like new inequities? So I think there's a lot to talk about this, but I personally think that that part of the accessibility and really having in mind all of the types of people is what us as UXers is our job.
Yeah, I
It,
think.
can, it completely is. That's a really, really valid point.
Yeah, and now that you're talking, I think that the key here is to be able to capture and to listen to human diversity. Like, perhaps the disability and accessibility are like common examples, but the metaverse is like having issues at some other levels, like it's still failing to capture issues related to gender and ethnic diversity. Like the avatars for some ethnic and minorities cannot be configured to capture the nuances of your personality, your clothing, your facial features. Like, it's still a male-dominated space. Women are facing issues with feeling welcome in the metaverse, with feeling welcome in these spaces, if they choose to present as women, which most of them do. So capturing that diversity has like some basic level. And speaking of blind people, there's also the fact that we are very visually focused. Like, this our sight is our favorite sense. Like, everything is for the sight at first. But what about the other senses? Like, I was reading this report, and users were usually not convinced enough with how their avatars looked, but they were also dissatisfied with the fact that they were no personalization layers when it came to voice. Like you can personalize a lot of things about your avatar's looks, but you don't have that access for your avatar sounds. Like if you wanted to use your voice, or if you want to do something else, there's not a lot of things happening in the sonic space of it. And that's also interesting. That's also had to do something to do with accessibility and people with disabilities, but overall diversity, how we want to capture and express it, and be fair in the way we do those things. And I think, like Dianela was also mentioning, like for design, there's also this design for diversity framework. And one of the key questions there is, who might you be excluding? And if we think of the metaverse as this visually rich environment, then what happens to the people with visual disabilities? But it goes beyond that, like ethnicity, gender, other sensory disabilities, motor disabilities. And I think, yeah, like Daniela, I don't really have answers, just questions. But I think the frameworks for us to approach these things are there. So there's a plus for me.
I think that's where it's always a good place to start, perhaps, in the history of humanity has always been the question, why or why not? And start from there. But as long as you're asking those questions and following this path, and like it's been throughout all of the history of humanity, we're going to be building upon what those before us, who those before us have, what they've created and learned, and go from there. Flavia, what's your take in terms of the future of the metaverse, accessibility, how that relates perhaps to healthcare, education, or anything else?
I think we need to. One thing I think for metaverse, for all that to be possible, is we need to make things like cost effective. So I think cost today is one of the problems for inclusion. And when we talk about accessible, I would say like it's affordability. So the equipment, right, they are very expensive. So if we go back to, at least here in Brazil, like mobile phones, they were really, really expensive. So nobody really had access to them. And nowadays, pretty much everybody has a mobile phone. So we can have some immersiveness in mobile phone, but if we really think about what we're talking about, metaverse, so having a headset, and now in a headset, I don't know, is like $2,000 in a headset. So until we lower that cost,
Did Flavia pause for
Yeah,
just
I
No,
me?
think we lost
Okay.
her.
I was afraid it was just my feed.
Okay, time to come in. It's hopefully she just join us, but I think it's a really valid point. Um, and I stand corrected because I think she's right. Accessible is still not necessarily affordable for everyone. And an idea that has come to my mind is libraries, perhaps. I think in the same way that we've kind of equalized the affordability of books and certain levels of education and accessibility to like documentation or newspapers, magazines, like maybe a library is a place where we can start bringing in some of these components as well. Or maybe it's already being done. I don't know.
Yeah, and
Yep.
speaking of, yeah, I think there are some efforts, and I wish I could link them, but I can't recall them top of my head. There are some efforts to create like these virtually based human knowledge libraries for everyone to access and to interact with. And connecting with what we were talking about, me and Daniela were talking about this idea of, okay, if we don't think about the metaverse as being virtual, but all of the senses, engaging all of your perception, well, we could think about Braille libraries, because Braille books are very expensive. Libraries for Braille books are very rare. I just can think of one in this country. And they get worn down with time, because the more you read them, the points, the dots get erased down by friction. They are delicate things, they are expensive things. But what if we think of a tactile virtual world with a Braille library? And that idea was like blowing our minds, to be honest.
That is absolutely fantastic. It's and where it doesn't get worn down. Is that even possible? Like, and you're right in terms of senses. Like, honestly, I think the tactile sense is the one that blows my mind and seems to be the most difficult, perhaps, to accomplish in a virtual environment, right?
Yeah, and but there are some, because tactile, we say tactile, and there is not one tactile sense. We perceive different things. We perceive temperature, texture, force, pressure. Those
Pressure.
are all
Mhm.
different things. But there are some interesting developments in the force feedback way. I work with a researcher that was doing pneumatics, like air jets, to provide
Mhm.
for force feedback for virtual reality. And I got to experience it, and it was amazing. You felt like the push, the inclination, the level of engagement was something else.
Yeah, like are they 4D? Is that what they're called? I know that I went on some rides in Disneyland that kind of simulated some of that stuff. And this was 20 years ago, right? Which was great. But it kind of reminds me of that. It's perfect. Well, you guys, unfortunately, Flavia's not here to sign off with us, talking about the remote working from home environments and, things that you'd have to experience in the metaverse as well. I'm sure. Bloop, somebody suddenly disappears. But thank you so much, Fermin, Dianela, for accompanying me all throughout the month of January and shedding light on the metaverse for us here at Dojo Live as well as our audience. And of course,
Thank you
you're
for
welcome
having
back
us.
anytime. No,
Thank you
it's
for having us.
absolutely our pleasure. So yes, those of you who'd like to learn more about fundamental VR, join me on Thursday, the February 2nd. It's February already, you guys, as we talk about that crossover of healthcare with education. It's going to be a great one. And of course, on Monday morning, we'll also have the recap show where we talk about all the great shows that we've had this week as well. And so for now, we will sign off. I wish you all a very happy, relaxing weekend and stay safe. Bye for now.
Have a nice one.